In the year 1861, in Mexico City, when the rains had just thinned and the streets glowed with a skin of mud that held shoe prints like the pages of a register, I carried my camera into a house that kept vigil with candles. It was not a studio day. My rented room in the Cala de las Vizcaínas would remain locked, its bellows asleep, the glass plates uncut. The mother would not move her boy through the streets. The city, under the weight of sorrow and politics, was in no mood to watch a little coffin pass by. I will tell you the truth of the room. The plaster was sun-cracked, and devotional images hung at a tilt, as if bowed. The air bore that sour sweetness you know only if you have steeped albumin with cinnamon to charm the smell. Egg whites beaten to a foam, left to settle, salted, then decanted, the albumin made into a skin for paper that was later bathed in silver nitrate until it gleamed like a blind eye. My fingers were still tacky with it, and every breath I kept behind my teeth, lest I fogged the glass. The priest had not yet come. There was only the mother, and an aunt who sat with folded hands, and a neighbor who had brought her a shawl and would not speak. I had brought my case of glass negatives wrapped in cloth, my holder with its drawing of St. Joseph scratched into the wood by a nervous apprentice, the focusing cloth, the tripod with sharp feet. The boy lay upon a table you would have used for bread, covered by a linen sheet that showed where his bones rose. They had opened the window to let light fall across his face, and set 2 candles near his ear, the weaker light trembling in apology for the day. "Signor," the mother said. She had eyes that would not blink. "Do not make him look frightened." "Signora," I answered, "he cannot be frightened now." She touched the crown of his hair as if denying that, as if a small boy's courage could still be coaxed back by the warmth of a mother's hand. She had wrapped a rosary around his fingers, though he could never have held that size of bead in life without dropping it. For the camera, the dead often learn to hold what they never could. You might think this forgery. I do not. The camera is a catechist. It teaches the hands how to pray. I set my tripod near the table, leveled the head, and lifted the camera from its case, smelling the glue and wood. The lens, brass warmed by the travel, caught a sunbeam and threw it in a narrow line across the plaster like a seam. I fixed the ground glass, lifted the focusing cloth, and pressed my face into the shadow with a quick closing of lips. The world turned upside down and fractured into bright and dim. The boy's face, dear God, looked better there, inverted, the way one sees a drowning man through rippled water. Long exposures, in such rooms, demand an obedience of everyone present. Breathing becomes a trespass. Grief must stand as still as a picture of itself. I guided the mother to a chair behind the boy's head, tilted at a slight angle. I taught her how to breathe so that her grief did not move her shoulders. She cried without sound. The tears slid and pooled in the clavicle hollow, and the neighbor dabbed them with a corner of the shawl that already smelled of smoke. The glass plates, I cut them in the morning, were still fresh to the fingers, oily where they ought to be dry, because the heat would not leave us. I had thought to make an albumin print later, with time to wash, to fix in hyposulfite and tone with gold until the shadows deepened like a prayer said twice. But that would require the negative. And so I carried the first plate to the little table they offered me as a dark corner, the aunt holding up her shawl to block the window while I poured collodion upon the glass. It ran thick and slow, the scent of ether and alcohol rising into my head like a hymn sung too close to the incense. I rocked the plate to the corners, then set it in the silver bath until it turned milky as a baptismal font. When I returned with the sensitized plate to the camera, the mother was still, the rosary grained with candle soot, the neighbor's face set like a wax Madonna. I slid the plate into the holder, drew the dark slide, and counted, because counting is the only cure for time. 1, 2, the candle fluttered. A draft. The window had been set open a finger's breadth, no more than the width of a psalm in a small book. 5, 6, 7, my own breath I clamped between my teeth. The old fear, that my breath might cloud the lens, rose like a memory of childhood sin. I stood aside, out of the line. 9, 10, 11. It is the disaster of a long exposure that you have time to notice small trespasses which you can do absolutely nothing to correct. At the boy's mouth, a paleness had gathered, a blur soft as milk, shaped like a cloud the size of his lips. I could not trust it. Perhaps the neighbor had sighed. Perhaps the priest had arrived and opened the door. I did not hear a latch. The air had the thin, motionless quality of a chapel after Sunday, when the flowers wilt and nobody wants to go home. 15. I closed the lens. I slid the dark slide home with the quiet a thief would envy. I said, "One more. The slightest movement, Senora, and he will seem as if he sleeps." "He does sleep," she said in a voice that thought otherwise. Back to the shawled corner, back to the bath, the glass slipping under the skin of silver like the moon under thin cloud. My hands went through their memorized rites. Would you have imagined, standing in such a room, that the faith of the hands matters more than the faith of the tongue? The aunt murmured a prayer I chose not to know the words to. Grief holds its own Latin. The second plate took the light differently. A breath of cloud must have passed, for the overall tone on the ground glass drew down to a gloom that made my heart lift. It meant the shadows would carry the weight of the scene, and the whites would not blow to uselessness. I slid the plate into place. Again, the counting. 3, 4, 5. The paleness returned to his lips. More than before. A slight fan of vapor, traced by the candlelight as if the flame sketched on a fogged window. It touched the glass of the lens, or seemed to. It trembled. It swelled a fraction and fled. 11. I closed the shutter. I wanted to say nothing but the truth to the mother. I wanted to ask if anyone had leaned near, or if a draft had opened another secret door in the house. But the neighbor had stepped back. The aunt's shawl had not moved, and the mother had not shifted the weight of her sorrow. There are rooms where lies turn to lead in the mouth. This was such a room. So I said, "We have it." I set my case upon the patio stones beneath the little fig tree, where the light fell flat, because I would not risk traveling with unfixed plates in a city where streets jostle you as if they had elbows. The neighbor came to watch as I poured the developer, metallic and sweet, across the first plate. I tilted it. Silver took the command of the image. The shadows rose. The mother's hand on the rosary formed like a ripple, then a shore. The boy's face came last, as if he were shy of arriving. When it did, the breath mark was there. No trick of my fear, white at his lips like frost on a window in a winter we do not know here. It has the shape of an exhalation. You cannot mistake the shape of breath if you have once watched a dying man trying to finish his prayer. "Madre de Dios," said the neighbor, then bit her knuckle as if she could force the word back. The aunt did not come nearer. She made the sign of the cross from the corner, looking at me as if I had brought a wind inside my coat. I set the first plate aside and poured the second. The same exhalation. No, doubled, as if the second plate had captured the very tail of it, the breath thinning into the shape of a flame. Between the two plates, there was the difference that turned suspicion into certainty, not a defect, not a scratch, not a smudge repeated. The vapor had moved. I did not know what to think in the portion of the brain that keeps records and watches the drying of chemicals. In the portion that still remembers a catechism from childhood, my scalp prickled. The boy had breathed between exposures, the way a drowned man coughs once upon being lifted. The priest arrived as I washed the plates with clean water in a tin bowl. He stamped his feet to rid them of the street, and had the scent of damp wool and incense stitched into him. His hair had been cut very close, penitentially. He did not so much bless the house as take account of it. I set the plates face down on a board, then face up because I could not help it. When he saw the breath marks, he did not cross himself. He stepped nearer to the mother. He laid a hand on her head and gave her a room of gentleness with his voice. Only then did he look at me, as if I were a tool he had not chosen. "Se hacen trucos," he said. "Tricks are made." "Padre," I said, "if you want me to throw them into the gutter, I will, and God can wipe them from the stones. But do not call what happened a trick until you have looked at the second plate." I held them so he could see both at once, the breath thicker on the second, thinned as if in the act of leaving. The priest leaned in until his breath was on the glass as well, real breath, warm, making a fog of its own. Perhaps he saw the blasphemy of it, his living breath mingling with the breath of a child who would never speak again. "You will make no prints," he said. "None. Leave the negatives here with me, and I will consider their fate. The Signora will have her consolation without people passing the plates from hand to hand like relics." The mother had not yet seen them, not properly, not with the certainty of what her eye would tell her if she were allowed to hold the glass and turn it toward the candles. She only knew a tremor in the room. For a terrible moment, I wanted to disobey the priest and lay the plates upon her lap and say, "Look, he tried, so that she could have this small, half-possible mercy. Padre, I said instead, it is her son's face. She paid for the likeness. Which likeness? He asked very softly. The likeness of death, or the likeness of a miracle? There are questions that are not really questions. I put the plates back into their cloths, but I did not hand them to him. The neighbor understood before any of us spoke. No prince, she said to the mother, and the mother flinched as if struck. I could have argued. I could have taken my camera and my pride and said, you do not govern the light. But the light in that house felt governed. I cut a piece of card and made a little envelope for each plate, writing with the butt of my knife the date, the name of the street, the initials of the boy, J.M., though I do not, even now, know if those were his true initials or ones I made to keep from driving myself mad with certainty. I told the mother I would come the next day to make an albumen print if the priest allowed it. I told the priest I would leave the negatives in the sacristy if he wished. The priest did not look at me when he said, bring them to the church at dusk. Do not show them to anyone on the way. You may condemn me now for what I did between that room and the sacristy. You may ask whether a man who makes images is responsible to the living or the dead. I had a small head start on that question even then, because the plates had chosen me to carry them and not the other way around. I took them not to the church but to my room in the Cala de las Vizcaínas. I hung a curtain, tamped the cracks with cloth, and lit the little red lamp. The tray of hyposulfite waited like confession water. I wanted only to reassure myself that the plates would last the night, that the emulsion had not blistered, that what I had seen was not some trick of the developing tray. I set them on the shelf. I sat. My hands shook. The room smelled like egg and coins. It is said that once you have practiced chemical rites long enough, the night knows you by your breath. I slept in the chair. I woke to the sound of glass speaking. Not breaking. Not sliding. A sound made when a finger, lightly moistened, runs the rim of a goblet. It is a singing. I do not claim a miracle. I claim a sound that I had no right to hear. I lifted the red lamp to the shelf and saw that the second plate, the one with the larger breath, had gathered a haze across its surface, a new soft film, as if the glass had turned to ice. I wiped at it with a feather. The feather came away damp. The city wakes early. By the time the bells marked 6, I had wrapped the plates twice and bound them with twine and carried them to the church, and by then I had convinced my mind that the damp in my room came from a leak under the roof, from the mouth of the rainy season still leaking its last. But the street had been dry. My shirt dried quickly once I had stepped into the sun. In the sacristy, the priest took the bundle with familiar disgust for a thing he could not refuse. He cut the twine with his thumbnail, opened the cloths, and frowned in a way that could have meant anything from pity to anger. I watched his mouth for any hint of breath. He looked at the plates, then looked at me, and made the expected cross on both our foreheads with a thumb that smelled of oil and ash. You will say nothing of this, he said. You will not print. I am not your servant, I said. But my voice did not carry the argument I wanted. Perhaps my voice recognized that a man in his vestments is a camera that captures obedience. He turned the plates toward the small window near the vestment press, light striking obliquely so that defects and miracles show. Do you know what will happen if I let you make prints? He said softly. The city will line up to see the breath of a dead boy, and some will bring me coins for it, and I will be tempted to take their coins, and then I will learn to doubt what I am. We will have lies with the quality of truth. We will have truth that teaches lies. Do you prefer that kingdom? I had not known I preferred anything. I wanted only to keep what the light had given me. Padre, I said, if the boy exhaled, whose sin is it to hide that breath, yours or mine? He looked at the plates for a long time. The little room sighed around us, and the vestments on their pegs swayed as if the same breath passed through them. When he spoke, it was as if he had chosen both our fates. We will keep one, he said. We will destroy the other. A compromise like that is a trap laid by heaven. We burned the second plate in a brazier that someone had used for charcoal weeks earlier and not cleaned. The tongs squeaked. The glass cracked and bent like a back under penance. The emulsion blistered and flowed, the image losing its features and keeping only its light, which, I swear to you, did not diminish until the last corner fell. The priest's face shone with the reflection of that small death. He did not cry, but he wiped his palms on his cassock like a man who has carried a bucket too full. The first plate, the earlier breath, he wrapped in linen with an altar boy's care. He slid it into an envelope of cardboard. He wrote the simplest possible thing upon it: "Do not open." Then he put it in a drawer and shut the drawer and set the key aside, not in the lock, not in his pocket. On the vestment press lay a small crucifix. He set it atop the drawer like a paperweight upon a secret letter. "You will tell the mother that the likeness is not fit to print," he said. "You will tell her the plate failed." "And what shall I tell her about his breath?" I asked. He looked at me with eyes that had learned the law so thoroughly the law had begun to frighten him. "That," he said, "is hers to see or not see. If she asks me, I will tell her the truth." I walked to the mother's house with the camera lighter by 2 plates and the heart heavier by half a miracle ruined. She sat where I had left her, not in the same chair, but with the same posture. Grief has so few positions in which to rest. The boys had taken the coffin away to the church, leaving an air that remembered its shape. The neighbor put out the candles and let the room return to the texture of day. I told her the exposure had failed. I told her the priest would say a mass. I lied for the first time in a room that had made lying a leaden effort the day before. The lie scraped my throat. She did not argue. Perhaps the only thing she wanted was a reason to cease wanting. But when I stammered at the door, hunting for a word that would not reveal what I could not keep to myself, she looked up as if she had heard a bird at the window. Did he seem frightened?" she asked, as she had asked before. "No," I said, and at last I told the truth. He exhaled. Her hands were the smallest hands I had ever seen on a grown woman. She touched her own mouth, and then, daintily, as if silencing a child about to speak out of turn, she touched the air above the place where her boy's face had been. I left her like that, blessing or sealing the absence. Do you want to know what became of the plate we spared? You will say I invented this part, but a year later, during a desert of heat that cracked open the jars of sugar in every kitchen and turned the saints in their frames glossy-eyed, I returned to the sacristy for a different commission. I had been asked to photograph the new retablo before they hung it. The priest had grown older by a decade in a year. These things happen to men who carry more than one silence. He unlocked the drawer, and the smell that rose from within was the smell of damp linen shut up too long. The envelope lay there. He lifted the crucifix that had weighed it down and put it aside. A quiet drop of wax had glued the foot to the cardboard. When he slid the plate into the light, there was nothing upon it. Not quite nothing. A faint form where the boy had lain, the line of the rosary, the candle's reflective limb, all pale as breath on a winter pane. But the exhalation that made a world bend around it, the frosted cloud that said not dead, not yet, was gone. He held the plate at angles as if a different sun might summon it. He breathed upon it like a doctor guessing at a fever. He touched with a linen corner as if polishing could coax the soul out of its doubleness. Nothing returned. "Perhaps," he said, and had to swallow before he could finish, "perhaps we destroyed the proof when we burned its pair." I wanted to say, and did not, that proofs are not things you can balance with tongs. I wanted to ask him if he dreamed the boy visiting him with a damp whisper. But I had learned by then that the church, like the camera, listens most keenly when left with the impression of a voice instead of the voice itself. He slid the plate back. He locked the drawer. He forgot the key atop the press, and never noticed when I saw him forget. Would you have kept that photograph, or buried it too? I go sometimes to that street when the fig bears fruit, and lets them fall like little hearts with thin skins. The window is shuttered now. The mother moved after a second death, not a child's, but her own in a kneeling posture. The neighbor has grown small and alert the way sparrows do. The house keeps no altar, but once in the heat that melts the glue out of the spine of prayer books, I saw a dampness on the plaster near the table they had used for bread. It was the shape of a cloud the size of a child's mouth. I pressed my palm to it and felt nothing but a coolness that belonged to another season. People of the city like to say the rains come and the rains go. We never admit that there are other waters that choose us. I did not tell anyone that I had gone there for this small desecration. The camera teaches a man how to keep a secret without turning it into a lie. Tell me, would you call it proof or blasphemy? I will tell you how it ended, insofar as endings exist for things the breath has touched. Months after the drawer was locked and the second plate gone to anger and flame, the city was struck by a fever that ate the mornings and left its peelings in the gutters. I could not work in my rented room. The chemicals soured fast, and the egg whites clabbered as if the air itself were curdled. The priest sent for me, not with a letter but with a boy who had the sacristy on his fingers in the form of wax and polish. The boy did not speak. He only held out a slip of paper with a smear that might once have been ink, and I followed him because a man follows even stains when he has been chosen by a plate. In the sacristy, the drawer stood already open. No ceremony. No key palmed and produced as if by sleight. The priest was thinner, a man whose cassock had learned how to hang from bone. He had lit no candles. He had allowed the light of the afternoon to do what it wished. It slanted in from the little window and cut the dust into columns like the organ pipes of a chapel too poor to own music. "I have broken my own rule," he said by way of confession. I took the plate into the nave. I placed it on the steps of the altar during the Angelus. I wanted the bells to give it back its breath. He showed me the first negative, the only negative, and it was as we had found it the last time, a pale absence of breath, a faint suggestion of a boy where a boy had been sure of himself. But around the edge of the glass, where the silver had always frayed like a widow's collar, there was a new condensation, a beating more like sweat than dew. It gathered when we held the plate close to the window and disappeared when we set it flat upon the sacristy table. He had noted this, the priest, with the care of a man who does not trust his eyes but must still record their mutinies. "What do you want of me?" I asked. A new exposure. Another child. The harshness of my own question embarrassed me. When a man works among the dead, a cruelty begins to dress itself as craft. He set the plate upright. He took from his pocket the little crucifix that had weighted the drawer, and he placed it upon the windowsill. "I want you to look at it," he said. "And then, should you be equal to it, to tell me what we ought to do with a prayer that refuses to settle." We stood with our heads bent like conspirators, our shoulders touching as men's shoulders touch only when playing at absolution. The plate accepted the light in a way it had not done before. Each mote of dust became a star. Each scratch took on the rigor of a signature, and very faintly, as if the glass remembered the warmth of the day I had first held it, the cloud of breath began to show itself, not at the boy's mouth, but in the air between his lips and the lens, where no breath has the right to rest. "You see it," I said, too eagerly. "I do," the priest answered, and then, "I wish I did not." We waited until the shape was undeniable, the curve, the taper, the way a breath declines at its edges into thinning. No man could have painted it onto the emulsion. No trick of rubbing could have placed it in the field. It was a ghost that knew glass and had learned, by long confinement, how to rise when light commanded it. "Let us put it away," he said finally. "As a doctor says of a body, there is nothing more." He slid it back into the sleeve and shut the drawer, and this time, with a decisive cruelty that made me admire him, he turned the key and put it in his pocket. I did not see the plate again for years. I went about my work. A wedding held in a storm that peeled the plaster from the church, a copper merchant's daughter who wanted a likeness with her hair down, a soldier who insisted on sitting for his portrait with a pistol that clicked when the shutter did, as if both men were cruel together. I told my hands to forget the geometry of a child's exhalation. I lied to my own remembering. And then, on the Feast of the Archangels, when the city wears out the soles of its shoes walking to and fro under flags and paper crowns, the priest died. He went quietly, they say, with no second breath to break the certainty. They carried him into the church he had served, and laid him before the altar steps, and they did not call me to take his likeness, a kindness he had arranged for me, I think, so I would not owe him the indignity of catching his soul with my glass. After the burial, a young curate, fresh with oaths and half-belief, asked me to help inventory the sacristy. He was all haste, all clean neck, all impatience with the drawers of a dead man. We went through the presses. We signed our names on an inventory that would one day be found by mice. When we came to the drawer with the plate, the curate grunted at the weight of the crucifix. The old priest had set it there again, either in foresight or in habit. The key was not in the pocket of the dead. It had been hung beneath the drawer, naively, on a nail, as if heaven enjoys jokes of that sort. We opened it. The plate lay within, and at first, with the impatience of the living, I thought nothing had altered. The same pale impression, the same ghost of a boy. But when the curate lifted it, and held it improperly, edges against thumb, prints pressed into silver in a way that made me blister with anger. The breath was present, perfect, steady, as if fixed now not by our longing but by time's odd mercy. It did not come and go with the angle of light. It did not bloom with warmth or diminish in shade. It was simply there, an alphabet that neither the priest nor I had learned to read when we first saw it. "Saints," said the curate, quickly turning it to the left and right, as if hoping one movement might contradict the last. "Is this one of those spirit fancies? We had a troop visit my mother's town, glass and candles and threads and laughter." He looked to me for the adult's laugh. I did not give it. "Put it down," I said. "On the cloth." Gently. He obeyed, because grief gives old men a brief authority. That was the last time anyone let a naked thumb touch that glass. What did we do? We did what men do when confronted with a relic that refuses to consent to either letter of the law. We wrote to the bishop with care that would have honored a saint's tooth, and we received back a note sent by a hand not his own. It said, in brief, that the diocesan archive would accept deposit of any materials of doubtful devotion for safekeeping from scandal. A clever phrase, that. Safekeeping from scandal. The curate, grateful for instructions that spared him a decision, wrapped the plate in linen, then in oilcloth, then in a manifest written twice, first with a description so vague it could have been a spoon, and then with a description so precise the devil himself would have blushed to read it, and I carried the parcel through streets that smelled of bread and rain. At the archive gate a man received it without surprise, as if every parish furnished one such argument a year. He signed in a large book. He did not ask me what the plate showed. I would have told him. I wanted to tell someone who was not God. But the archive has its own priesthood. He tagged it, he shelved it, it vanished into the large sleep of ordered things. Sometimes the city delivers to me shadows of it. A story comes breathing down a corridor. Someone swears they saw a photograph that exhaled. Someone swears that when the bell sounded for the archangels that first year, a mist appeared on the naves midair and did not touch stone. Someone swears that the old priest, on the night before he died, put his lips to the plate and asked it to teach him how to forgive. These are stories a city tells when it knows its saints are tired and its photographers are worse. I cannot show you the plate. I never made a print. No albumen sheet on my wall will ever be said to carry a child's last breath. But in my pocket, polished by years of handling, I keep a small strip cut long ago from a ruined glass, just the margin, just the place where emulsion thins and silver says, "I will not take." I touch it sometimes when the rains begin. It is cold, and then as glass does, it remembers my skin and warms. If I hold it close to a candle, the margin smokes, not really, not as smoke is, but with a bloom that is almost breath. And I think of the mother's tiny hands blessing the absence. And I think of the priest weighing a crucifix against a drawer as if faith were heavier than locks. And I think of the boy who exhaled once between my plates and turned two men's lives into a question they will never answer. If you had it, if I put it in your hand right now, would you close your fingers and keep it, or would you place it on the altar and walk backward, as those who know reverence must? If this has found you, quietly tell me below what you would have done with the only breath that would not settle. And if your heart can bear another, next time I will bring you to a parish where a burned daguerreotype reformed overnight in a sacristy drawer, or to a village that buried its camera and dug it up wet.